Guten Morgen, Jenny hier. Ihr schaut den Einmischen-Podcast, hier wird Politik betreut. Und wenn ihr die heutige Folge unterstützen wollt, liked, teilt und abonniert diesen YouTube-Kanal. Andere Möglichkeiten findet ihr in den Shownotes, Steady, PayPal, Überweisung oder meine allseits beliebte Wunschliste gefüllt mit Büchern und Dingen, die wirklich Spaß machen. Und in diesem Sinne entlasse ich euch in die heutige Folge. Habt viel Spaß, gebt mir Feedback, kommentiert. Ich würde mich sehr freuen. Bis bald.
Hello, dear listeners, and maybe some will watch this video. My guest today is Peter John Heather. He is a British historian of late antiquity and the early Middle Ages. He's chair of the Medieval History Department and professor of medieval history at King's College London. He specializes in the fall of the Western Roman Empire and the Goths, on which he for decades has been considered the world's leading authority. Heather has written several works on the fall of the Western Roman Empire, contrary to several historians of the late 20th century. He contends that it was the movement of the barbarians in the migration period which led to the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, for which he's often criticized. But I am happy to have him here today and talk about his newest book, which was published in English under the title Why Empires Fall, Rome, America and the Future of the West, in Yale University Press in 2023. But in German, it's called Stürzende Imperien, Rom, Amerika und die Zukunft des Westens. It will be published tomorrow in Germany.
Tomorrow, yeah, I didn't know.
It is tomorrow on 13th of July in the Klett-Cotta publishing house for 25 euros. And I have my exemplar here.
Yeah.
It's not really seen in the video. I will show it to my listeners or watchers when I work on the video. But as you can see, I've made it my Hintergrundbild.
Yeah.
So, how to start? Maybe something I haven't really prepared for, but sometimes the reality of our lives happens. So, for example, when a historian like you, who has worked on something like the end of empires, watches something like the Biden-Trump debate, what do you think?
Frankly, I'm in despair. There's something very wrong with an internal political system that ends up with two candidates of that caliber. And I don't mind the range of views. There should be a range of views, but they're neither of them at their absolute peak. Joe Biden is someone I respect very greatly, but there's a time and a place, I think, and he's struggling a bit. But the American political system is clearly struggling to identify and promote high quality public servants and who to come forward and stake a claim to political office, to offer a grown-up choice to people. Biden at his best, I'd have no problem with. I do have problems with Donald Trump. I won't pretend I don't. But this is not serious political combat. I mean, if I think about the recent election in Britain, by comparison, again, I have my own political views, but there's no doubt the two protagonists in Sunak and Starmer are both serious public servants who think hard about problems facing our country and our allies and the world in general, and try and offer, for the most part, sensible solutions. There are political oddities at every part of the spectrum, let's face it. But, for the most part, you could not object to them as candidates. They're both serious candidates. But America is struggling to get to that point. And it never used to. I mean, this is a new phenomenon. So, yeah, it didn't make for happy watching, I have to say. And I come from an Anglo-American household. My wife is American. My sons have both British and American passports, and Irish ones too. So we are we are a Western family, Western imperial family, you might say. So, but we have a strong stake in America. So it's a bit heartrending.
But they have other options when the American empire failed.
Yes.
And that's maybe good news for them right now.
Yes, maybe so. Maybe so.
I asked this question because another historian said that the US has entered its Soviet phase. Because at the end of the Soviet Union, there was a line of Soviet Politburo heads who were really, really old. Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what the historian compared Biden and Trump to.
Yes, you're probably too young, but I remember we weren't quite sure whether they were still alive or not when they were lined up for the May Day parade.
I've read about this phase. I think everyone was shocked when Gorbachev was the next head because he was so young and alive.
Oh my God! Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I remember it very well. Yeah.
What would you compare this phase in American history to when looking at the Roman history? Was there ever a phase comparable to this phase of American history?
Well, I wouldn't. I'm very far from writing America off. And actually, you've got a particular problem raised by Trump-style politics. And there is a time limit on how long Trump-style politics, as manifested at least by Trump, will sustain themselves. If he wins, unless he can change the Constitution, which I very much doubt he can, then in 4 more years he's done. If he doesn't win, he's done. This is a very particular, I think, very toxic moment in American politics, but I wouldn't be so sure that it's terminal, and that the American polity can't restore some stability and sanity to itself. I mean, I'm very sure, for instance, that a lot of saner, younger Democrats and Republicans did not run because Trump is running.
That's probably true.
They stayed out of it, but they will return to the fray. And a more centrist American Republican Party is absolutely not off the cards, I think, in the sort of next decade. My parents-in-law were utterly liberal Americans, but they voted Republicans. The Republican Party didn't used to be like this, and it doesn't have to stay like this, I think. So, the current election scares me to death, but I'm not without hope that America can find its way back to the center.
That's really interesting, and I'm really sorry to ask you these contemporary questions. I will come back to your book.
And I should say I'm not an expert on these.
Yes, I know, but I try to work this into the question why or how do empires fail? And America is an empire, and I'm not so hopeful as you because I've been looking at the Supreme Court and what they decided just the last 2 weeks. And one could say they made the American democracy into some sort of monarchy where the president cannot be prosecuted for something he does while in office. And that's not even something Great Britain does with its kings. Yes. Even there, the king has to answer to the public if he does something that's unconstitutional or against the law. So my question really would be, if there's something like the Supreme Court and it changes the system so dramatically, is there really hope for this system? Or is that a sign of an empire, a system in decline?
Well, Supreme Courts come and they go. For 30 years, it was a bastion of liberalism in America. It's now going to be a bastion of conservatism, and a very particular brand of conservatism for a chunk of time. But they do eventually die. And they replace. Where there's death, there's hope. As the old-fashioned career advice put it. So again, they can decide certain things, but of course, it's not clear what the scope of this law is yet. And in a sense, it already existed to some extent, because British prime ministers and American presidents have all authorized things that are totally against international law, usually overseas, and have done it many times, and would certainly be considered unprosecutable for those decisions. It's a question of then what does this mean in practice, and we'll have to wait and see. It's in some senses, I'm not surprised by the decision, not just because it's you had that Republican-dominated Supreme Court, but also because in practice, realpolitik means that leaders of major states are faced with decision-making that certainly goes beyond the bounds of normal law. That's the way it is, whether one likes it or not. They've never been prosecuted for those things. Maybe they should be, but they never have been. It's a question of whether they can, what this allows them to do within their own society. I think that's the real punch point, and we don't know that yet. Case law will actually decide that.
Let's hope for the best then, that the better conscience of society wins out, and that the society makes the courts prosecute presidents and governors and everyone who's responsible if they do something wrong.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, the alternative, which darkly occurred to me, is that the Biden administration should be seeking to use this decision to screw over Donald Trump in the coming 4 months. That's what I'd be doing.
I've read some tweets on Twitter who called for something like, "Hey, Joe Biden, why do not assassinate Donald Trump while in office? You can do it. The Supreme Court says you can do it. So do it."
Well, I say nothing.
That's really macabre and really, really dark. But but they sort of said it's okay as long as you do it with the military. It's fine. It's really fine. You can even do it. Okay. Let's come back to your book. We live in a time of polycrisis. For me, as a child of post-Cold War times, this is completely new. I have experienced crises, but they were more or less orderly. Yes?
Yes. Sure.
But now every crisis comes at me at once. Was there a phase in human history you would compare these times to?
I think there are certainly moments of huge upheaval. Of course, what is slightly different about the modern world is the extent to which all the regions of the planet are interconnected. And you can't get away from that. We live in a much more globally connected world than previous human societies have done. So you would not find, I think, intersecting sets of crises encompassing so many different global populations at one moment in the past. But that's because the societies did not connect with each other. But you would certainly find this kind of level of upheaval on a slightly geographically more restricted scale in the past. And it does come when a long-established order faces challenges which mean that it can't continue to operate, at least in the way that it's done up to that point. So yes and no is the classic historian's answer for the question.
It depends.
Yes, that's right. But yeah, sure.
Okay. At the beginning of your book, and I have the German version here because, and that's why I will be reading it in German and try to translate it to you. Then there is a really interesting two sentences. Not something I would ask a question to. I just found it interesting and funny. So the first is: Die Grundbesitzer richteten ihre Lebensplanung darauf aus und eine kostspielige juristische Ausbildung. Nicht mehr die lokale Freigebigkeit war jetzt der Schlüssel zum Erfolg. Der Anwalt Theodorus, der Konsul des Jahres 399, ist ein Beispiel dafür. So that's a sentence that says that landowners choose to become lawyers and be part of the government to reach their life goals, for example. So maybe a question to that is, so what I find interesting here is that in some way the extension of lawyers implies empire in decline.
Well, I'm not sure I really meant it that way.
No, that's my way of funnily interpreting it. Lawyers are a sign for bad things to come.
A sign of decline. Yeah.
And the other sentence is funny for me because I work as some sort of tax collector.
Mhm.
Was die Steuerlast betrifft, muss man sich zunächst vor Augen halten, dass die Geschichtsforschung trotz intensiver Suche noch keine Gesellschaft ausmachen konnte, die sich über eine zu niedrige Besteuerung beschwert hätte. So the sentence here is, despite intensive looking for it, there is no point in human history where the people have
considered themselves insufficiently taxed. Yes, I remember the sentence. I enjoyed writing that.
Yeah, I found it really funny because I'm working in taxes. and the taxes can never be too low. Even if you pay the people, I think they would always, even then, they would say, no, that's too little.
Yeah, it would be interesting to look at some of those Persian Gulf societies where, there's so much oil money that you do get all these huge handouts, and how do they feel the handouts are too low? It would be very interesting.
Maybe there's a reason that these societies are authorities as well.
Yeah. Yes, indeed.
So you write about the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in this book as well. As I learned from other historians who talked with me in this podcast, the Eastern Roman Empire survived until the 15th century. You have another view.
I do have another view on that.
Yeah, yes. You can talk about your view right now after I finish my questions.
Yeah, sure.
So how can this history help understand contemporary times? And now you can tell me that the Eastern Roman Empire did fall way sooner.
Yes. My view is that if you're thinking about a kind of empire with global reach, then the rise of Islam in the 7th century demotes the Eastern Roman Empire to a kind of small regional power. And it takes away 3/4 of its territorial base and its taxes, and it reduces a global power to a small regional state at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. So I do think that after about 650 or certainly 700, you're looking at in Constantinople as much a successor state to the Roman Empire as any of the states that you see in the West. And so it was their kind of ideological self-presentation was that they were the Roman Empire continued. But if you're measuring it in practical, and in terms of practical power and global reach, you're missing a point there. I mean, it's an arguable point either way, but certainly the Empire of Constantinople after 700 is nothing like the Empire of Constantinople before 600 AD, and that's simply a question of fact. How you want to then, conceptualize that.
Maybe we can say Rome survived in some way.
Yeah, there's certainly a concept of Rome survived, absolutely. But to come to your question, there are lots of things, of course, that are different about the modern world compared to the world of the first millennium that I studied. I wouldn't pretend that there are simple models and analogies to look at. But the fundamental point of the book and the argument that I came to looking at the ancient world, and that my co-author, who's a modern political economist, John Rapley, came to looking at the modern world, and we came to this independently, then had a conversation where we put the two together and said, actually, that's really very interesting. Is this that the fundamental argument of the book is that empires change the world around them, and they change it in ways which make it more difficult for them to continue to exist, because they transform the societies with whom they interact in ways that generate economic development, political strengthening, probably cultural coherence as well in those neighboring societies. In other words, empires change the strategic balance of power of the world in which they exist. They come into existence because there is a concentration of power that's available to them. Empires create a world based on their own sort of power structures, but over the long term, they change their neighbors in ways that undermine that original advantage in the balance of power that they had. And after a sufficient time, you're going to have to renegotiate it. Doesn't have to lead to complete disappearance of empire, but you certainly cannot carry on being the kind of empire that you used to be, exercising, untrammeled power across the globe. So that's the fundamental line of similarity that I find in the sort of looking at the first millennium AD, and that I think is observable in the modern world as well. And this is what we're trying to highlight. The modern West has created China. The modern West has created India and the other BRIC countries. It's in the middle of creating the new economic powerhouse in Africa. And that means that the West, while not really becoming poorer in an absolute sense, is becoming relatively less dominant in terms of its share of global GDP, and practical political power is always very closely related to it. So that's the.
Yeah, it's interesting to read this book because I can see the conversation you two are having.
Yeah.
Because I can see when the historian is writing a certain part of a chapter, and I can see the economist answering. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So and
I hope it does show up. I mean, we were trying.
Yes, especially in the second and third part, because there is more of this there's more to read of John Rapley and his reply, because the first part is more of history, per se. And in the second and third part, there's more of the modern world and the economic views of Mr. Rapley. And I can read more of him.
Yes. It's also the case that, we know what happened with the Roman Empire, and we don't know what's going to happen absolutely in the modern world. We know there are certain trajectories of development that are set now, other places, other parts of the planet are going to get richer. But what exactly happens as these relationships are renegotiated, that remains to be seen.
Maybe we could look at the British Empire, because that was more or less a more modern empire, and it was really global, and it had the modern way of communication that the Roman Empire did not have. So what would you say could happen with the Western American Empire looking at the British Empire?
Well, there's the better outcomes, and there are the less good outcomes that one can see. I think the better outcomes depend on convincing Western electorates that you cannot recreate the sort of Western economic dominance of the planet that existed, in 1999, at that point when the West is consuming 80% of global GDP. That, that's a very odd moment that will never come again. You cannot expect it to come again. It's probably a good thing that it never comes again, because this is a very, what that implies about overall human relationships and the state of our planet is not a good one. So we have to accept that that is not possible. So you can't just make America great again in the kind of Trumpian mold, because, the production of wealth is now distributed across the planet. America is not the world's industrial powerhouse as it was in the 1950s, etc. That can't happen. So you have to accept, or you have to try and accept Western and convince Western electorates that you can't have simple answers to this, that other major players on the planet are here to stay. And, this is the future, whether we like it or not. And maybe we should actually like it, because there are some good things about it. But then you have to start forming, they're both political and economic observations follow from accepting that. The economic one is you have to work out what is your country good at, because actually continuing to generate wealth means selling things outside of your economic zone, because that's how new wealth comes into your society. Germany got that very well in the early 2000s, becoming a major exporter and concentrating on exporting. That's that second phase of post-unification economic boom in Germany was very well crafted.
Yeah, we have a word for this, export Weltmeister.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't see this in the, although it wasn't bad in some ways, the world, some parts of it were bad. The debate in the recent British election, I didn't see people sit down and say, well, look, the things we sell to the rest of the planet are A, B, C, X, Y, Z. This is what we need to concentrate on in order to maximize the wealth generating potential of our economy. I just didn't see that in the political discourse. Yeah. It's very strange to me that, so they're all, the hospitality sector doesn't do it. That's just passing money around that already exists within your society. It isn't about generating real wealth. So economically, you need to think about that, and in Britain, one of the great things we have is an excellent, I shouldn't say so, being part of it, is an excellent university sector that teaches in English, that's very attractive to well-educated young people from right across the planet. And we've had governments that are just so worried about immigration that they won't let all these students come and study here and bring money and expertise and energy and enthusiasm into the British workspace. Now, what is so terrible about that? I cannot see, there are a few other things that Britain does very well as well. Those are the things you should be concentrating on, Yeah. So that's the kind of economic side of it. Thinking about what do you offer the planet? Where can you potentially make a difference so that people want to buy your stuff? Because, the easy ride of they can't make it themselves has gone. Everyone can make it themselves. So you've got to be offering something good and something extra. The political observation that follows from it is that you can't sit around easily expecting to dominate the planet anymore because, China's economy is almost as big as America. It might even be bigger or it might be slightly smaller. It's hard to know, but it's more or less the same size. This is very different from even the Cold War because, the Russian economy was never very large. They just spent all the money on weapons. China is a real global power in a way that the Soviet Union wasn't. So the world has changed. Instead of kind of sitting back on kind of established Western domination, you need to think about who are the right people to be forming alliances with, who you think your friends are. And there are a lot of, because of a lot of the history of the British and other European empires, there are a lot of countries out there that would be very happy to form productive alliances with the Western world. And currently, those kind of things are not in the forefront of people's minds. This is something that I am hopeful about that will change because of the British election, for instance. The previous government cut down on overseas aid, and actually, all the evidence is for every pound or euro that you put into overseas aid, you get 2 back. Because it's a very creative thing to do, as long as you put it in the right direction and to the right purposes. But it's a benefit to your economy. The previous government cut that right back, but the new government is firmly committed and sees the point. So, and that's a way to build these kinds of relationships. So there is almost a kind of we're seeing a kind of slight move to liberal democracies at one end of a spectrum and places where the rule of law holds up and authoritarian state structures at the other end. And there are plenty of non-Western societies with strong heritages in the rule of law and with liberal democratic traditions, that we might be looking for further alliances. In a sense, you might say the British Empire evolved from this centrally run thing from London into a commonwealth of associates. And maybe that might be the model that the modern Western world could do, is actually becoming a broader liberal democratic rule of law commonwealth, looking to pull in as many people, as many different societies into that kind of, under that kind of umbrella as it can find.
I just remembered I did not congratulate you to your Independence Day after 14 years of Tory rule. And I'm joking about this because you just said that the Tory government cut back on overseas investment and those projects to help underdeveloped countries. And this is coming back with a new Labour government.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about my government with a liberal finance minister who is going to cut all those projects, from which I know, especially as export, as a nation that's so heavily reliant on exporting goods. Yes. This is like shooting yourself in the knee. Yes?
It is. Yeah. I mean, it's seriously
insanity.
bonkers. it plays so well with a certain group of the electorate, but this is where being courageous to say, actually, the world has changed. We need to make relationships outside ourselves. That's the only way we're going to flourish in this globally connected planet. And actually, it's well worth it. We will have more money to spend on health. We will have more money to spend on roads and education and everything else, and social care and everything else that we want to spend money on at home if we do this.
Yeah, but the thing is, you cannot even make a moral argument, because they would not listen to moral arguments, because even if you say it's the right thing because it's morally right, they do not listen to that. But even if you argue that it is economically right and it benefits the nation, even then they do not listen to this argument.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's always a chunk that won't listen. But I think, you don't frame your arguments to them because they'll never listen to you anyway. But there is a kind of next door chunk who, if they hear the message loud enough, will understand that actually, yeah, okay, that'll do. I mean, I won't name names, but I see it amongst some of my neighbors who voted Brexit and now realize, actually, it wasn't a terribly good idea economically.
So learning from your mistakes is a good thing.
Yes, it is. It's better not to make them in the first place. But
but learning is even not making them would be better, but it would be worse if they would not learn from them.
Yes, seriously. Yeah.
It's nice to see that the Brexit it was a reaction of the electorate to get this old glorious past back, yes, to get rid of the European Union, and now they see we cannot get this past back, and we need others to have a future. So maybe Britain will join the EU in the distant future again.
It might do. I mean, if one was making a joke about it, the rule of thumb in the medieval period is that Britain does what the continent does, but 100 years later. So, in fact, potentially we joined the EU a bit soon, would be my comment as a medieval historian. We should have waited another 50 years and then it would have been fine. But I think the trajectory, I don't see us rejoining the EU very soon. I do see it.
Don't worry. The EU would not take Britain into it again because they are fed up with their chaos.
Absolutely, yeah. But I could see something more like rejoining the single market. I can see that happening actually within perhaps my lifetime, which would be nice.
I mean, you talked about hope. And hope is a good thing. I have lost a lot of it in my young years, but I try to reapply it into my daily life. It's really, really hard, but I try. And that's a hopeful prospect that things are going to get better, because right now it seems very dark. But then again, Britain elected Labour. The French kicked Marine Le Pen in the butt. So maybe we should not concentrate on the bad things, but concentrate on the good things.
Yes. And one of the things that is very striking, one of the things that struck me doing the book with John, is how much economic development is happening in Africa. We hear about all the kind of African basket cases, all the societies that are failing, Sudan, wars,
or the coups.
Yeah. There are lots of other African societies, 7 out of 10 of the fastest growing economies are African. This is good stuff. This is actually will benefit everyone, to see an equalization of wealth, a greater equalization of wealth across the planet. And I don't think we need to be too frightened of that, because it doesn't mean that our societies are going to get absolutely poorer. It is that other societies are going to get richer, and that is just a good thing. The other thing, curiously, that does give me hope is that I think the logic for openness that is driven by the aging of Western populations will become so powerful that the kind of arguments, the sort of anti-immigrant closing off kind of argument, will just collapse on itself, because it will become quite clear that it just doesn't work. That, as a 64-year-old white male, I'm very happy that people are living longer. At my age, my grandfather had a life expectancy of about 5 years. Mine is 20-something, and long may that continue. But it does mean that we have vast swathes of our population, and they're going to get more numerous, who are not contributing to the economy.
Yeah.
They're contributing to society, but not to the labor force. So
I'm sorry, I misspoke. Yeah, they are contributing to society, like my grandparents watched over us as kids, and that's something.
Yeah, but we are short of labor in our societies, and we will get shorter of labor. And AI won't look after older people and give them someone to talk to, as well as someone to help them get dressed and make meals and all the rest of it. There are all kinds of tasks and jobs that we want real human beings to do, and we will not have the living, breathing bodies to do that. So that will become. It's such an overwhelming thing, this demographic shift in the West. At the moment, it's still hidden because people stay fitter for longer. I hope I don't look 64.
No, you look more like the end of the 40s. No, this changing of the society and the birth rate, I think this is something we will have to face pretty soon, because South Korea is mentioned in your book, and that society does not bear any children anymore. Yes. I think the birth rate is fallen to 0.7 per woman, and that's just insane. There are whole schools who have to be closed because they do not have new classes of children. Yes. So there is a really big problem brewing right now in Western democracies, and we will be facing them rather sooner than later. Right now, the answer to this in Germany is for politicians to say, yeah, if you want to, you can work longer, but that will not be solving the problem, really. Because people are living longer, but that does not mean they can work longer.
No, and it depends what job you do,
Yes.
I'm a university teacher. I talk to people, I'm kept young by all these wonderful, bright young people that I interact with. It stops you becoming stuck in your ways so much. That's a job you can do, well, until you go bonkers. I mean, there'll be a time when I can no longer do it. But, for the moment, I can do it perfectly well at 64 and do it very well. And the kind of dynamic between slightly older and young people is a nice one, as well as other dynamics to have within the university setup. But there are other jobs that you can't do that. If you're a school teacher chasing around after primary school kids, that's a much more demanding job. Can you really?
Yeah, you go bonkers more quickly.
Absolutely, and police, fire. There are all kinds of jobs that you cannot keep doing forever. So, there are some things you can, and there are some things you can't, and it's not sufficient to say, oh yeah, you can just carry on working forever. That's clearly not an answer.
We talked a little bit already about the American Empire, but compared to the late Roman Empire, in which state is the American empire right now? A depressing one, I know, but
well, I think it's having to face the challenge that its global reach and its global power is not what it was. The rise of China in a political military sense is matched by the rise of a whole series of other highly productive economies in the economic sphere, to mean that America is not and cannot be the kind of dominant world power that it was from the 1950s down to, say, 2000 or thereabout. That world order is gone, and America is facing the challenge of how it is going to respond to that. I think that's a very difficult moment, because you've got all kinds of political constituencies within America that think it's just a question of will, that you could, by changing policy, by changing your determination, you can bring back that old world order. And that's fundamentally what John and I are arguing in the book, is that you can't. Once the tectonic plates of a world economy or a regional economy, Eurasian economy in the first millennium sense, once they've shifted, and you're faced with a brand new order, and you're not powerless within it, but you can't be as powerful as you were before, and you have to think about what is the best way to maximize your interests in this new strategic context. How are you going to act? What are you trying to achieve? What's the best outcome that you can achieve for your populations? What will that look like? And so I think it's that challenge that America is facing and having to think about. And I don't see too many American politicians who are willing to frame the debate in that kind of way, because, in some ways you can hide it from yourself. America is still militarily unbelievably powerful compared to any other country on the planet. I was at Marine headquarters when the Ukrainian war broke out, and they were muttering, we could sink the entire Russian fleet without even trying if we wanted to, which they could. So,
which is not a real challenge, because the Russians are really not a good navy.
No, and the Ukrainians,
they never had a good navy, and never will have.
No, but I mean, they do have all this power, military power, but the economic structures of it have shifted, and therefore the strategic context has shifted. So can America find a way to be, and its Western allies, because I think we're all implicated in this, can we find a way to cooperate and coexist with other people who are now becoming as rich and as powerful as we are? Are we willing to do it? What should the world look like? Are we willing to see this as maybe a good thing rather than a bad thing? Those are the challenges we're all facing.
As you mentioned, the conflict between America and China, I listen a lot to the historian / economist Adam Tooze.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a year ago, he was in Germany talking about this talk in Washington about not if they have a conflict, a real military conflict with China, but when. And that the political center in Washington has now more or less been separated from business and its interests. So, as you described it, it would be better for the world and the continued existence of America as a superpower to come to terms with the fact that China is a superpower as well, and to share the wealth and to develop its trade with each other. And in your book, you describe this fight of superpowers and its negative effect at the example of Rome and Persia. So maybe we could use this history to tell the Americans that you cannot compete with another superpower and hope that you will get out of this scot-free, because even the British Empire at the end lost its empire because it was in too many and too big conflicts. The First World War and then the Second World War ended the empire, essentially.
Yes, I do think that. I would say in the case of China, the West will need to play hardball with China. The Chinese will take everything that they think they can get, or the Chinese authoritarian regime. I should be very precise here. No, I have to say, on my few visits to China and with the Chinese students I teach, there's nothing at all worrisome about Chinese as individual people. They're just people, It's strikingly ordinary, in fact. But that doesn't mean that you go head on into armed conflicts and direct confrontation. So far, China's been pretty restrained. That's the point we make in the book. They're making a lot of noises about Taiwan, and there's a lot of arm flexing going on. But compared to kind of British imperial actions in the 19th century, it's nothing. And compared to the Western willingness to take out left-wing leaning leaders after World War II in parts of the world they didn't think should be there, there's not a lot of that going on either, actually. So, you have to worry about authoritarian regimes, especially when leaders get old. When leaders get old and mad, you end up with the invasion of Ukraine. And that is a problem in authoritarian, if you were to look at authoritarian political structures, there's quite a lot of rubbish being talked about. Oh, they can get things done. Well, yes, all right, that might be the good news, but look at the totality of the way that regimes work in authoritarian political structures. Think about the chaos that attends the transition of power, and think too about the way in which slightly mad, aging dictators who want to establish their place in history can move policies. So, I don't know. President Xi has seemed pretty pragmatic thus far, but maybe he'll go old and mad. I don't know. It's certainly possible. On the other hand, China is not. China's been very cautious in flexing its muscles. And has it really done anything that goes beyond what we would legitimately expect a very powerful nation to do? Not sure it has yet, to be honest. We'll wait and see. If you compare its record to the Russian or indeed the Western record of interference in other countries, it's economic and it's cultural rather than political and military. So I've heard different people say different things about China, that it will stay pragmatic or that it will eventually get military. I guess we have to be prepared for the military, but I wouldn't be assuming that it's going to go in that direction. So again, I'm not without hope on that front.
They seem to play a far longer political game and using trade in ways we do not do in the Western world, because they really have nothing but time. Yes, they have this concept of far planning for the future, more or less in 100 years, as we in Western democracies look for the next 4 or 5 years. They are planning ahead for the next 100 years. So that may be an aspect that we haven't seen military interventions from China till now. But maybe it will come when the American empire is far more weaker.
It might do, and
But that's speculation. I know.
Well, and if you look at the way that Homo sapiens sapiens has historically behaved, the idea that we're all going to suddenly become peaceful and nice and cooperative.
It's not off the table, I know.
It's that's a difficult argument to sustain, I think, although some people try. So yeah, I wouldn't. I am perfectly happy that NATO spending, military spending, should reach the upper limits that people are talking about now. That seems to me entirely sensible, but that can sit alongside very creative policies of engagement with every country. I mean, not only with China, but also with the developing countries of South America and Asia and Africa as well. We talked about foreign aid before. The Chinese are doing a particular form of foreign aid. I mean, they sometimes build you stuff you don't actually want, is what I hear. Whereas if we're willing actually to help people build the things they want to build, we might actually find that they're much more receptive to being part of a kind of, expanded Western liberal democratic rule of law Commonwealth than the Chinese authoritarian Commonwealth.
But that would need a new way of thinking in the Western world as well. Because as we look at the IMF, it has not such a good track record.
No, it does not. We talk a lot in the book about how these institutions have basically run the world in a way that suited the West since 1945.
Yeah.
And
that opened the door for China and its form of foreign aid.
Yes.
And the trust in the West is just eroded.
Yeah, no, seriously. And, people talk about the kind of unanimity of the global response to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. It's not unanimous. An awful lot of the developing world has not signed any of these things because Russia was the only place that stood up for them when the West was milking them dry after 1950. So they're not going to do it. And you couldn't really expect them to do it. But the West has to clean up its act, acknowledge the way that it's slightly brutalized the world for its own benefit up to now. But nonetheless, the kind of structures that have evolved in the West, I think particularly the rule of law, is something that offers huge benefits to more human beings within the societies that have it than any other form of organization. And this is a model that a lot of people will find attractive. Living in a world where you can't just be screwed over because the person next to you knows someone at the center of government, or not easily screwed. That's a serious benefit to one's daily life. I've had students who've come out of former Russian, Soviet bloc countries who come and study with us in London. And one of the most striking things one ever said to me was, like, all these English people, you're so relaxed, You're not looking over your shoulder constantly. Does the person next to you have a friend in the party, which means that they can take something off you just like that?
Yeah.
And we have no experience of that type of anxiety.
I had a talk with a German author. He wrote a book called Kinder der Gewalt, Children of Terror. And he talked about this Russian town after the end of the Cold War and the end of the UdSSR, and how it developed in a living hell for a lot of students of a special school, because the regional mafia could go there and rob the school children and rape the girls in this school, and nobody did anything. The police was in cahoots with the mafia, and the party was in cahoots with the mafia, and that was really, really shocking for me. And that's something I think that's still in play in Putin's Russia right now. And you cannot imagine how freeing it really is to live in a democracy where your social standing and a party membership or your wealth can dictate if someone who does you wrong goes scot-free or not.
Yeah.
So, theoretically, the West and the democracy we created has the better argument, but we still have to clean up our act.
Yes. We've used wealth taken from the rest of the planet to make our own societies better. And we now need to share those qualities with everybody else, I think. That's kind of how John and I feel about it.
Yeah, I feel about that too. But it's not even, we are not even able to convince our own society to share its wealth inside the society. So it's pretty hard to convince them to share the wealth with the rest of the world. But maybe we should hope for it and make the argument again and again.
Yes. Well, we now pay much more tax than anyone has ever paid in the whole of history, as you probably know, being tax-based.
Depends. It depends. If you live from your work or if you live from your inheritance.
Yes, indeed. Yes, that's right. There's certainly an interesting imbalance in that.
Yes, taxes are interesting.
Yes.
And it always has the potential to create real upheaval in a society.
Yeah, absolutely. Very emotive issue.
Yes, as the British know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the 4th of July was not only an Independence Day for the British, but it was also an American Independence Day. And there was a history of tax, I think.
Yes, no taxation without representation.
That's right. Okay, what would you say? Which lessons can we learn from the end of the Roman Empire for today?
I would always come back to that central argument of the book. I mean, this is the argument that I think really works, and that is that long-lived empires change the planet in a way that makes it impossible for them to carry on in the old way. You can try and hold on to the past, and that will lead to collapse and disaster outright because you can't. Or you can accept the reality that the world has changed and think constructively about how to maximize your position and the quality of life of your populations in the new world that you've created. You've created it. We've created it. So we can't bitch and complain about the fact that it's different because we've made it happen. So therefore, what do we do from here? Don't lament the past. Go from here, think constructively and move forward.
Okay. In the end, the Roman Empire may have collapsed, but some aspects survived. Yep. Even in the periphery and the centers who got stronger because of the empire, in the periphery, and that developed new empires in the end.
Yes, and the cultural structures have a kind of afterlife, which is very weird in the sense that, if you think about Roman law, it disappeared for a while, but then it's rediscovered in the 11th and 12th centuries and becomes a foundation stone of the way that European culture works. And that's an extraordinary story. In other words, it doesn't even have to be continuous aftermath. Sometimes the aftermath can be a kind of reinvigorating reinvention later.
Or rediscovery.
Yeah, rediscovery, yeah. But hopefully we can have a bit more direct continuity.
That would be nice, especially because the collapse of an empire is always not so nice. It's always accompanied with conflict and instability. Yes,
there are always going to be a lot of interest groups who will fight tooth and nail to try and hold on to what they perceive as benefits and whatever. You have to kind of slightly convince them that there are as many benefits in the new order. They might take a different shape, looked slightly different, but that actually there's some very positive things to be had there.
Is there anything you want to say to your book, or questions you have never been asked, but would like to be asked? Anything you want to say to your book?
Well, the other thing I would emphasize, apart from the way that empires change the world around them, is the demographic shifts. This was the bit that absolutely startled me. The fact that, as late as the 1830s and the 1840s, between 30 and 50% of European children were not surviving. They were dying very young. So people had these enormous families. Suddenly, they start to survive because of inoculation and better food in the late 19th century. And you see this extraordinary explosion in the number of Europeans or people of European descent across the planet. So normally Europe is between about 12 and 15% of the world's population. And that's where we're back to now. But in 1900, it's 25% of the world's population are of European descent. Europeans are breeding like rabbits and spreading right across the planet. This is the era of empire making. But that quickly adjusts, and we're now in a place where we're back down in the sort of historically normal 12 to 15% of the global population. And of course, because we're having so many fewer children, it's an aging block as well. So I think in a sense, the age structure of the European population, and when I say European, that's true of America as well. So the Western bloc population, this is the thing people should think about a lot and contemplate. This is the reality going forward. This is a big step change, which will make us do things differently, because we are not replenishing our labor forces. We are faced with more and more people in retirement living longer. And it is, once you get past 80 or whatever, that you start to need much more healthcare and whatever. So there are lots of implications that follow from the inescapable reality of the changing nature of the age profile of our populations. And this should be in the forefront of our minds as we think about the future going forward and what policy steps we should be taking.
That's a really interesting aspect. I still look for a book that's mainly concentrated on the role of demographics in the history of the human population. Yeah, and how the future of a country was changed because of a demographic explosion.
Yes.
Because you can see in Africa, that's the demographic dynamic continent right now. And everyone I talked to, every historian, I think can see that this is the future of humanity in a way.
In a way it is, but Africa is also getting the adjustment. So
they were plundered a few hundred years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of discussion that was knocking around in the autumn was that in about 20 or 30 years, you won't be able to buy an immigrant for love nor money because there won't be any surplus population anywhere. So maybe you should be nice to the ones that are around at the moment. Might be that.
Yeah, that's a good argument. Do you have an last message for my listeners?
No, not really. That would be kind of too self-important. I think this argument about empires changing the world is a really good one. Has a lot of strength to it. And I would say think about that, and think also about the changing age structures. But don't be too downhearted. I think human beings tend to do the right things when they have to, but I think we're being forced into a situation when we have to. Left to our own devices, we all act unbelievably selfishly. Is the general message that one might take from history. But when circumstances force us really to concentrate, then we get better outcomes. And I think maybe we're heading towards that kind of a zone.
That's a nice message. And do not worry, I ask every of my guests for a message at the end. So it's not just you.
No, I thought it might be a question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter. I really enjoyed your book, and I hope many, many Germans will read it.
Yeah, so do I. And thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and bye.
Bye now.